Few things. Respectfully, that's bat crazy. Everything you just said. Respectfully.
Immigration is a big issue for us because the system is really not working for anybody.
Thanks to, like I said, people like you, thanks to all this independent media, we could get the truth. And through corporate media, they've been lying to us for years, and we finally can see what's really going on. They can't hide it because you're going straight to the people.
You know, you guys, it's not even like watching news. It's just watching truth. You know, it's just watching, like, not just speaking truth to power, but speaking truth to people.
Bernie Sanders won Nevada. As I said, there's no way around it. He absolutely won.
You to go back to
Saudi Arabia, and I've been here my family well before the Civil War. I had two brothers fighting Iraq. And they told me that they don't have a problem with my religion because that's what they fought for, was the freedom of America.
Just that, just holding up, taking it one day at a time, just one day at a time. As you can see, we just got through the holiday, so it's definitely, her presence was definitely missed, so yeah.
And even here in Cleveland, there were people who, even some of these progressives were saying they weren't going to go to the Browns games because some of the players said they would kneel.
Tell me, what do you think? Do you think that's right? No. So what are you gonna do?
The man turned and saw me there recording his racism that he was displaying right out in the open, and he lunged at me in attack.
No, talking to this guy here. Okay.
My knees were skinned, my elbows, my arm. The phone itself was completely, absolutely destroyed.
Just stopping us,
BLM. BLM's come in here and try to rip the flag and stuff. They threw paint on it.
The ideology of Antifa just attacked us. Yeah. The ideology, the fake Antifa that Joe Biden says.
There's also a personal aspect for me. My mother worked here for 24 years. She was the residency coordinator of the neurology department, and this used to be a fantastic place.
The government's giving more help to the Fortune 500 companies than the corner grocery store.
Because we have a shortage of hospitals, or hospitals are closing all over the country, in rural areas and also in our urban areas, and it is immoral in every single way.
Talking about shutting down a major hospital and converting that property into hotels or condos or some other real estate opportunity.
If we had Medicare for all, it wouldn't be happening, period. That's just the end of the story.
You're factually wrong. The state legislature is Republican. What I don't understand is you keep saying they're going to have to recount it because there's fraud, but you can't actually explain where the fraud is, what the fraud is.
Yeah, exactly. I can't, but there's a lot of fraud going on.
Yeah, we give a about you, Doomsday. That's not to you. I give a about you. They don't give a about you.
Why to you is it such an infringement on freedom to wear a mask? That's what I'm asking.
It's annoying as hell, that's right.
Is it more annoying than death? But they have tried to ban transgenders from the military, other restrictions, employment discrimination against transgenders.
Well, that has stopped now since the Supreme Court ruling.
Right, but President Trump is the one who instituted it.
Right, but he was opposed to people joining the military for the sole purpose of being funded for sex change therapy.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, that's the truth.
Was following me outside. Was following me outside. I have credentials. I can show it to you. Is this how you treat the press? Do you see what's going on here? And then somebody came up to my cameraman without saying a word and just ripped his press thing off.
Look, man, I'm not happy at all. $600 million is not enough, because how do you put a price tag on my kids' brains, their organs, my heart, like all of the stuff that's happened because of this, the layered trauma, the deaths. There's literally no way to put a dollar sign on it.
Can you answer people 6 years later, is the water back to normal here?
Absolutely not.
The DNC just reached out to all the other candidates, and they pretty much just conspired to support Joe Biden. And I mean, just intervening with the democratic process.
The brotherhood is great, but we have something we're fighting for. That's why I joined the Proud Boys. So like, the brotherhood is great, but I joined it because I wanted to beat up some commies, man. Like.
So we started to shut down city councils every single Wednesday for about close to 3 years on issues concerning houseless.
Black Lives Matter wants to eliminate police because actually the founders, if you read their page, they claim to be 3 lesbian separatists who hate black men. If you remove the police, they hate the nuclear family and they don't like heterosexuality.
Depressed. There's no other way to feel. There's no other way to feel except depressed, except angry, except upset, except not surprised. Unfortunately.
The live stream earlier, it was completely peaceful. People were blowing bubbles, people were squeaking rubber ducks. Absolutely peaceful. So you're the head of Proud Boys, you're from Florida. Chairman, okay. So what do you think about this event? Like, what was your goal here?
Our number one goal was really to get, and we could see it right behind you guys, really to get the police to do their job and to offer them the tools in order to get them to do their job. Now they have the ability to use CS gas, which is really important to us.
It's time that we get resources that we need. It's time that I get a full-time nurse at my school. It's time that I get a full-time counselor and resources in my community.
And the invisible prison of wealth inequality in itself that you talk about all the time. Why would Rachel Maddow ever, get out with a camera and microphone and put herself into that?
Chris Smalls is leading the march. Chris Smalls was an Amazon worker in Staten Island, New York, who was fired for trying to organize for safety.
He got rid of illegal, what's it called? He deported more people than any other president. And Trump
prior to him, yeah.
So Trump is a good old boy. Like, he just loves America, and he's not into identity politics. I'm not,
It's about the lives that are forever changed by these fires.
Poisoning the news that we are fed with those tainted sources. All we ever ate was a steady diet of status quo. This hijacked narrative is the truth of mass suffering, injustice, and corruption throughout our land. Status quo, status quo, status quo. To expose this shift to oligarchy came a band of honest journalists. They left the studio and hit the streets to give the microphone back to the people. From sea to sea, the people were empowered to share their truth. Their voices no longer stifled, reclaimed their power. Join the media revolution now.
Hello. Status Coup, Monday, September 27th, 2021. Jordan Sheridan.
Jen Dies. Hello, friends.
Hold on. I don't know, Jen, if it's definitely not your face, but you kind of look like Trump.
Oh, I need to adjust my lighting.
Orangeness. So
hold on.
It might be interesting for the viewers. I don't know. But
I'm role playing during the story we're going to cover today.
Right. And Jen, we talked, let's try something different because, the platform we're on, we're trying to be very big and get around algorithms and just try it. So the platform we're on, it seems that if certain things are in a headline, that all of a sudden it's a much, much smaller audience. It's almost like if certain things are in a headline, they hide it. So that's why we made the headline, "This will be hidden." Catchy. Maybe people would click it. More importantly, maybe people would see it, because we know certain things that are in a headline, not only the topic we're going to talk about today, but a lot of topics like, certain workers being exploited by multi-trillion-dollar corporate Goliaths and criminals. Many, many topics. There's like a keyword list. So
am I good? Color good now?
Yeah. So hopefully, this headline and the thumbnail with just the question marks might actually get seen on YouTube, because our numbers have been absolutely anemic lately. We had Congressman Khanna, which we'll get into later, the highlights and our takeaways. I think it had like 400 live viewers, which isn't even possible. I mean, we have 121,000 subscribers. I think we cut a shorter clip from my interview with Khanna, and it had like 200 viewers in an hour. It's just ridiculous at this point. Anyway, smash that like button. You will know what our topic is in just 1 second. Share this live stream. The more people that share, the more people that will see this live stream. Big
double key getting us. Oops. Well, thank you. I didn't mean to put that one up. I meant to put, but thank you, log 66. Double K getting us started. $20 in the super chat. Thanks, Double K.
Right. And I posted a members video, by the way. I think it's like 15 minutes. So that's up for patrons as well as paid members, kind of giving you the behind the scenes of the Khanna interview, what led to it. So check that out. But today, Jen, we wanted to talk, obviously, the bipartisan infrastructure deal and the standoff between progressives and all that. And, right-wing Democrats is still going on. But I don't know how you could lead with any story other than you think it will be, it will plummet when we even mention the name.
Maybe.
I don't know how you start with
test.
anything other than Julian Assange and what seems to be a very, very in-depth report showing that the CIA, the Trump administration essentially was putting together plans to kidnap Julian Assange as well as assassinate him. And shockingly, through just White House lawyers, that plan never ended up being executed. Fortunately, joining us is Kevin Gottstola of Shadowproof. Kevin, check out Shadowproof. He does great work. And Kevin did really, really incredible work for months, waking up, I think, at like 4 or 5 a.m. Chicago time to cover the extradition hearings in the UK with Julian Assange. As a reminder, the UK judge ruled not to extradite Julian Assange, but still he has remained languishing in a UK prison. From many reports, he's lost a lot of weight. His health, both mental and physical, has suffered while he's languishing there while a U.S. court, the UK court considers the appeal that the U.S. Is continuing. So, Kevin, we got a lot to go into. This is a really in-depth report. I also want to play a clip from my interview with Khanna, because I kind of challenged him on why he and other progressives are allergic to the name Julian Assange. But just to kind of give the point, the highlights of this, Colin, if you could put it up, the highlights of this story, and if we're missing anything, you'll fill it in. But this story shows, I don't know if you have the graphic, Colin. There we go. 2017, the CIA plotted to kidnap Julian Assange. Trump administration debated its legality. Senior officials, including highest levels in the CIA and Trump, discussed killing Assange. Plans included extensive spying on WikiLeaks associates and sowing discord among members. The most recent war against WikiLeaks began after the publication of Vault 7, which we'll get into in a second. In 2016, Pompeo, they labeled WikiLeaks a non-state hostile intelligence service.
2017.
They wanted to basically name them an official state enemy, but they couldn't prove that WikiLeaks was working for Russia. Yahoo spoke with 30 former U.S. officials, which I find that more believable than most of the junk we see on current, high-level current intelligence officers, which is usually just BS. The CIA proposals were so worrisome, some officials quietly told members of Congress. So, Kevin, I mean, you've been on this more than most journalists. I mean, I guess this was kind of, some parts were suspected, but the breadth of this, what is the significance of this, and how does it affect potentially the ongoing charade, in my view, charade of a prosecution against Assange?
Yeah, so let me just first, with that point, push back on the cynical attitude that often comes of, well, I'm not surprised. We could have expected this. I feel like that lets people off the hook who are abusing their power. I mean, we're supposed to be able to set a standard in our minds for what we would like our government to be and how we would like them to act. And then we go from there, and I judge my government, and the way I go about doing journalism and the way I decide whether something's outrageous or not is based upon principles or values that I presume they want to uphold or that they want to impose upon citizens. I mean, they want to tell us that they follow rules and the law. So let's see what they're doing. What are they actually doing? Do they follow the rules? Do they truly care about the law? And I think this story answers a lot of that. I mean, when you look at the facts of this story, it provides specifics that were unknown, because time had to unfold within the Trump administration. But we knew when Mike Pompeo stepped forward as CIA director or was appointed back in 2017, we knew that he had singled out WikiLeaks as a non-state hostile intelligence agency. And what that meant is that, to use a euphemism from the war on terror that was popular at the CIA, the gloves were off. As far as what they could do against WikiLeaks, they could go through a laundry list of options and they could target the media organization for disruption. And we now see from this reporting, which I think is pretty solid on the part of Michael Isikoff and Zach Dorfman and Sean Naylor, that what we find is they were sketching out plans to go after and potentially assassinate Julian Assange, as well as people who were based in Europe who perhaps had copies of files that are from these materials known as Vault 7, which these weren't the hacking tools themselves, but they exposed that the CIA was engaged in these offensive cyber operations, which included things that are very similar to what had been exposed by NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden when it came to that agency. And so then, in addition to the plots to assassinate, we also have that they would they were considering putting Assange on a rendition flight, much like what they have done or had done to terrorism suspects or people that they detained under the auspices of fighting the war on terror. And so the idea would have been to put him on a plane and bring him to the United States. I don't know if they were planning to secretly interrogate him. Doesn't seem like the CIA initially intended to bring a case against him. That was going to be after the fact, something for the Justice Department to deal with, after they found out that the CIA had him in their custody. And so we have all of this information, all of these details that point to the fact that there was this major shift from, remember, in 2013, the Obama administration says, we can't charge him. If we do, we'll have a New York Times problem. That issue is that if we charge Julian Assange, then we're going to be almost obligated to turn around, or it would be the case that editors of newspapers that handled the documents published by WikiLeaks could be vulnerable to prosecution. So we're going to back off and we're going to choose not to prosecute him at this juncture. However, what we see in this story is that the fact that WikiLeaks stepped forward to assist NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden to get to safety, he was trying to get to a Latin American country. Then he became trapped in the Moscow airport because Julian Assange and Sarah Harrison is actually an unindicted co-conspirator, someone who is her name is not in the third indictment, but she's mentioned in there. They're criminalizing the assistance that Assange gave to Edward Snowden. And because of this, they basically decided that the Obama administration was going to shift gear, no longer treat Assange and WikiLeaks as off limits. They would go back to doing total surveillance of WikiLeaks. They go back to, and they'd escalate it to targeting the organization for disruption. And then they'd consider these plans, which seem highly detailed, to assassinate Julian Assange, a publisher, a journalist.
And something that stood out to me, I know he's not, the prosecution against him, which to me is a charade, is not over Russia. But one thing that stood out, at least from the report, which, we shit on corporate media a lot, so let's just give credit where it's due. Yahoo did a great job on this, is they could not find any conclusive evidence that Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, was working for Russia, with Russia, which for a lot of MSNBC viewers, they don't really have an answer to the facts of they're prosecuting him for something that liberals used to champion Julian Assange for, exposing these war crimes. They just keep talking about that. It's just, it's kind of like this endless Russiagate, things that have never been proven or just assumed to be fact. So as part of this report, it said they could not find actual evidence that they could actually use in any type of prosecution or use in any type of way of classifying WikiLeaks as a hostile state actor or something like that. They just couldn't find the evidence that they were working with Russia. That's correct?
Yeah, that's what it says. It says very clearly that the CIA could not prove that WikiLeaks was working directly for Russia. And so they had to go a different route. And that route was to define it as a hostile entity. And so that should be, basically, game, set, match for the liberals out there who think WikiLeaks is some kind of outfit that has been advancing the interests of Vladimir Putin and others in Russia. It's just absurd. In fact, one of the things that I think my biggest gripe about this story is that it accepts everything that came from the Russia investigation that has never been proven as fact for the most part. It accepts that the intelligence agencies were reasonable to believe that WikiLeaks was working on behalf of Russia, when a lot of that has not been proven at all. I mean, in fact, Mueller's investigation, when they put out the report, there's a whole array of things they could not corroborate and prove, which is why you don't see any indictments weren't ever issued against people affiliated or associated with WikiLeaks when it comes to that investigation, which I think is significant. Because there were indictments passed down against lower level Trump officials.
One of the things I wanted to ask you was on that point of, because that was my main kind of critique of the piece too. While I think they did a great job, they, as you said, accepted all the Russia stuff at face value. So Colin, if you can pull up Stella Morris's tweet, please.
Well, by the way, it should be pointed out that Michael Isikoff wrote a book with David Corn, pushing a lot
indeed.
of Russian nonsense.
Yeah. So this is Stella Morris. This is Julian Assange's partner. They have children together. And she tweeted, impossible to overstate significance of expose of CIA plans to kill Assange. But Russia exfiltration claims are false. Corrupt security contractor UC Global admitted fabricating Russia claims to keep $200,000 a month in U.S. bribes coming. CEO is charged over plots and obstructing justice. So if you can kind of tell people what that Spanish company UC Global is, and could explain what Stella is talking about here.
Yeah, so UC Global, its director, David Morales, is actually facing a criminal prosecution right now in Spain. And so that's the one aspect of this story that, well, first, it's pretty glossed over when you look at the story. I mean, UC Global is mentioned in it. It's sort of said in passing. They don't really connect the dots, but they're working on behalf of the CIA. They were in the embassy doing this work, and there's a lot more that could have been included just to really show that this went beyond just conversations among officials that never came to fruition. So it's not just that officials were talking hypothetically about killing Julian Assange, and then some people in the Trump administration said, that's crazy talk. And then the Justice Department came in and they charged him with the Espionage Act violations. And then we all moved on, and whew, that was close. We avoided this thing that could have been a disaster and been a big, huge stain on our country. And that's not really what was going on exactly, because the CIA had deputized this private security company to pose as security for the Ecuador embassy and help them by sending audio as well as video footage to the U.S. to the CIA so that they could access this and it could help them engage in these offensive operations, which we now know are, fairly detailed or at least acknowledged in this report from Yahoo. And so these were violations of Assange's privacy. He's pursuing this criminal case. There have been testimony given by witnesses. El País in Spain did some tremendous reporting on this, as well as there was some reporting filled out by the Gray Zone on Sheldon Adelson and how it went to the Las Vegas Sands, and how there's a Republican connection to this of him before he died. There was some bankrolling, it seemed, or that he had created some kind of a cover for David Morales to be involved in doing some of this work, so that it didn't appear to be so obvious that the CIA was the one tasked with providing this contract. And it's worth mentioning because it comes up in the article that Julian Assange, was he or was he not going to go to the Ecuador embassy in Moscow and be there? And was he going to get some kind of like diplomatic immunity and go there? This was mostly overlooked. It's not something that I paid really close attention, but given this article and given the focus on how he could have, quote unquote, fled the embassy, it's worth noting that back in July of 2019, Amal Clooney, who you may or may not know, was part of the Assange legal team. And she suggested that Assange would qualify as the technology minister for Ecuador. And he could do this in the UK. He wouldn't have to leave and go anywhere. He could stay there and he could get safe passage out of the UK. And this could be a loophole for him to be able to exit the embassy without being stopped. So whatever they're talking about in this article about how he had to, and it's shut down. Like basically he was told that this might be an option to go to Moscow, but he rejected this idea of going to be based in the Moscow embassy for Ecuador. But the idea that he would have to do any of this or that he had any interest to go to Russia, it's pretty nonsensical. The fact of the matter is the CIA was panicked that they were going to come up with some means to give him his own diplomatic passport so he could leave and he could go from the UK to a Latin American country, presumably Ecuador. But I guess he could have gone to like Venezuela or even Cuba, and because that's where they were panicked that Edward Snowden might go. And so they went into overdrive. The CIA went into overdrive to try and stop him.
And let me ask you, I mean, there seems to be, I don't know if the UK was part of, or the UK government was part of any plotting or planning, but the report does talk about that the UK knew about this and somehow was involved. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I mean, one of the more insane parts of this story is this idea that there's going to be a shootout maybe outside the embassy, and they're going to shoot out the tires of an airplane if he tries to get on board, that they're going to hit this Russian airplane. I'm trying to pull up that section of the story. It's really something that we should read to people who are watching the stream, because it's phenomenally incredible. All right, I should be able to get it now. I mean, okay, so here we go. The CIA and the White House prepared for a number of scenarios to foil Assange's Russian departure plans, according to 3 former officials. Those included potential gun battles with Kremlin operatives on the streets of London, crashing a car into a Russian diplomatic vehicle transporting Assange, and then grabbing him and shooting out the tires of a Russian plane carrying Assange before it could take off for Moscow. U.S. officials asked their British counterparts to do the shooting if gunfire was required, and the British agreed, according to a former senior administration official. So, yeah, the British were brought into this wackiness, and the idea would be that the British government would give them some kind of cover so that they could, I suppose, limit and mitigate some of the disaster, the diplomatic disaster that could come. But I mean, we know that all of this, whether we're talking about the things that are very questionable about the Swedish prosecution authority and how they started and dropped, and then they reopened, and then they dropped, and then they reopened the case into the preliminary investigation into sexual allegations. And then we know with the British government that a lot of that is all happening based on the coercion of the U.S. government. And that's not just conspiracy theory mongering on my part to suggest that. I mean, I realize that there isn't a whole lot of proof as far as Sweden may go, but as far as the British government goes, we know from this article now that the reason why Julian Assange was why he still had that bail jumping charge against him. It says this in the article. The reason why he still has that bail jumping charge is because the British government agreed to keep it after the Swedish prosecution authority dropped that investigation into Assange. So they needed something. They needed something to still keep him from being willing to leave the Ecuador embassy. They had to keep him there in the UK. And what the British government agreed to do is keep this charge. And the reason why I'm making such a big deal out of this is because that's why Julian Assange is in jail right now. That bail jumping charge has created this aura around Julian Assange in the minds of judges, like District Judge Vanessa Barretzer particularly, but also it's allowed the prosecution service, the Crown Prosecution Service, to stand up there and treat him like someone who's at risk of flight, of leaving the United Kingdom without facing the appeal court, without staying put for the rest of this extradition process to play out. And so that's why he's in Belmarsh prison. If he doesn't have the bail jumping charge on his record, then he'd be free right now. He'd be sitting somewhere. He'd be able to defend himself. He'd be able to respond to the Yahoo News report and tell everyone what he thought about these revelations. He might have even been quoted by Michael Isikoff.
Right.
So let's go back a little bit in history, the history of how our country top officials have viewed Assange. Colin, if you can pop up just for reference, the Hillary Clinton piece, the piece about Hillary Clinton. Now, this actually first appeared in True Pundit, which is not, a publication that I can recommend, but this did make, some waves. It did make news, and she denies it. But what was reported back then, this again is 2016, is that she joked, and Colin, if you can scroll down to where it says the quote that True Pundit had, can't we just drone this guy? So that's what the claim is from True Pundit, that she has denied making, but that kind of, made a big splash. So we know that Hillary Clinton felt a certain way about Assange. We know that when WikiLeaks published what Chelsea Manning had given them, that it really, really pissed off our intelligence officials and those in the government. So here we have 2016. So this is summer of 2016. The presidential election is going on. And WikiLeaks started publishing, of course, the Democratic emails. So the CIA at that point considered people affiliated with WikiLeaks valid targets for spying. And this changed kind of how WikiLeaks was viewed. And when Trump got into office, it really, as you've already talked about, it really, really pissed them off, especially Pompeo in the CIA, about Vault 7 being released. And so it's like he saw Rat Haspel too. And so they kind of started talking about what could be done. And you can offer some more insight into this, Kevin, but there had been, even during the Obama administration, even though, Obama chose not to prosecute, et cetera, reportedly there was some, discussion of assassinating Assange previously. But when we get to the Trump admin and Pompeo, take us through what happens and how things changed in the CIA as well.
Well, primarily the difference with the Trump administration is that they can do whatever they would like to go after WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, and that, they don't feel hamstrung by the First Amendment anymore. That's something that had been there on the minds of the highest level people in the National Security Division of the Justice Department, which those are the people who bring these Espionage Act prosecutions in the Eastern District of Virginia against, well, up until this point, it had only been whistleblowers or former government officials or contractors who are accused of leaks. And so you see that they, it's kind of a tandem, like the way you see this in the article, What's Represented. I don't think they're on even footing, but you've got on one hand Mike Pompeo, who's, you can play the clip if you want, of him laughing, being like, we lie, cheat, and steal. That's what the CIA does. He's open about it. And he's not really interested in how they're going to bring Julian Assange to justice through the more traditional legal means of putting him on trial. And then there's Jeff Sessions, who's the Attorney General, who really believes that the case against Julian Assange should be reopened. And he plays, I think, the biggest role in them ultimately going forward and finding some kind of a charge that they can bring against him. It requires dusting off the old investigation, basically reanimating this grand jury that had laid dormant for the problem with the Obama administration is that Attorney General Eric Holder never came out and actually announced that the case was closed into WikiLeaks. And so everything's still there, and they can just go back to it and pick up where the Obama administration left off. And then they're able to go ahead and begin to piece together this. They start calling witnesses to come testify before the grand jury again. And that's where, we had that 1 year where from 2019 to 2020, almost exactly a year, Chelsea Manning was brought before the grand jury to testify, and she resisted, refusing to testify and basically give any information that could be used to further this case on principle, that she would not cooperate with grand juries. And Jeremy Hammond, someone who had been prosecuted related to the hacking of the Stratfor files, which were published by WikiLeaks, he was plucked from the prison in which he was serving his federal sentence. He had his ability to, basically because he was plucked out of there and brought before the grand jury, he ended up getting out of prison later than it was supposed to be. And so he came before the grand jury, refused to cooperate. Both of them were allowed to go back. Chelsea was freed after sadly attempting suicide for another time. And then Jeremy was sent back to prison to finish his sentence. This all happened right around the time, just a few weeks before COVID-19 shut down the entire country. So you've got this grand jury that's bringing people before it. They're collecting more evidence, what they think could be evidence, or any sort of statements that they could add to this indictment. And around this time too, the FBI also, we learn because of the fact that Bjartmar Anderson, who's with this Stunden outlet in Iceland, basically the FBI decides that they're going to work with a person who was a teenager at the time of the disclosures from WikiLeaks. And his name is Ziggy Todarson. And they're going to see what they can get him to give them so that they can put it in the indictment. All kinds of claims that are spurious hacking allegations against Julian Assange, which we now know are false because he spoke openly about them to this journalist. And we have the recordings that can be played for people to hear. This guy's a pedophile. He's preyed on underage boys, and he's an habitual liar, but he's the FBI's informant. And the FBI essentially went into Iceland, and they claimed that they were going to help the Icelandic authorities with some kind of investigation. And it soon became clear within the Ministry of Interior that they were actually using this as a pretext to target Assange and WikiLeaks. So all these FBI agents got kicked out of the country. And so you've got this aspect. You put this along with what the CIA was doing, and then it shows the sheer corruption around all of this. And you can take this to the next part where you look at, was there improper undue influence on the Justice Department? In other words, were the abuses of these intelligence agencies, the national security agencies, the reason why the Justice Department decided to bring the case? Was the hostility among these agencies the reason why Julian Assange was charged? And so it's not because he committed a crime, it's because there are it's a political offense, essentially.
Well, at one point in the report, it says something like, we're, the CIA's floating around all of these plans. Oh, shoot, we've got to figure out how to charge them ASAP.
Yeah.
To piggyback on what you were saying.
Yeah, so that's where I was going, that basically the Justice Department is showing its hand there. It's saying, we charged Julian Assange because the CIA was going to A, do something much worse, or B, they were pressuring us. They were basically saying, if you don't indict Julian Assange now, then so it's there's no two different ones. It's just one thing. It's basically one thing. If you don't do something now and charge him, we are going to take action ourselves. And that's not something the Justice Department wanted, because they would prefer to do this within what they think is the boundaries of the law, although they're kind of creating it as they go.
Let me just boil this down. And to be clear, you've done all the in-depth reporting, so it's not simplistic. But let me just make this simple, because I think this is kind of simple if you really do it in a nutshell. Obama, I'm sure the CIA, all of these nefarious agencies were pushing Obama, his DOJ, to prosecute Assange, possibly more than that. He, like you said, they didn't do it because it would basically set the precedent. They would also have to prosecute New York Times, Washington Post, and others that do the same exact thing that WikiLeaks does. So Obama doesn't do it. Then around the same time that Mike Pompeo and the CIA are fuming that WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, are releasing the Vault 7, which essentially is giving away U.S. hacking techniques and mechanisms, they, soon after prosecute him. And in that prosecution, I mean, I've read it twice. I'm sure you read it more than that. It doesn't seem worth the paper it's written in. Some people say, well, yeah, they're not going to put the evidence in the indictment. Well, they didn't exactly put the evidence in the trial, the extradition hearing either. There was no concrete evidence that Julian Assange did anything more than urge Chelsea Manning to, provide the classified documents, which is no different than the Washington Post did to Daniel Ellsberg, and the New York Times probably did to whoever their source was to give them Trump's taxes, and on we go. So it seems to me you have after this Yahoo report, you have a very direct cause and effect here. Trump, it wasn't even Trump really. Pompeo came in. The CIA already hated Assange, but it went from a 8 out of 10 to a 20 out of 10. And that is what led to this nefarious prosecution, which brings us to this question. Well, we've seen the media aghast when more and more things are coming about what the Trump administration did, trying to access journalists' emails, journalists' phone calls, who they were speaking to, who they were emailing with, a whole lot of other things that are coming out. And it leads CNN, it leads MSNBC. I was kind of surprised, Kevin. I saw CNN cover this. I saw the MSNBC cover it. It's not leading their shows, but at least they're talking about it. But if they're so aghast at all the extrajudicial things the Trump administration was doing, I mean, where is the corporate media asking the Biden administration about this? The only thing we have seen, Colin, if we could play it, is an Al Jazeera English reporter last week questioned Jen Psaki, the press secretary. She's probably the only White House correspondent who has dared to even bring it up. And Psaki dodged.
Look at the CENTCOM review.
Go ahead.
And that's something that would come out of the Department of Defense. I just want to jump around because I promised I would. Okay, let's go to Al Jazeera first.
Yes, thank you. Hey, I've been trying to ask this question for months. I appreciate you taking it. It's a freedom of the press question. Members of the administration, you recently this week have talked about the importance of journalism to democracy. The president also made a point of saying his presidency was different from his predecessor. So why is President Biden keeping the Trump-era charges against Julian Assange? Why is he allowing the prosecution from publishing the truth about human rights abuses in Iraq, Afghanistan, Guantanamo? And does the president believe the ongoing detention of Assange is reasonable, even moral, given the transparency delivered and the greater good served?
Well, I don't have anything new to say on the on Julian Assange, and I would point you to the Department of Justice on that. I would say, though, that we do think of ourselves, and we are approaching this from an entirely different approach of the last few years as it relates to freedom of the press. And I think the Department of Justice's actions as it relates to the prosecution of journalists, or how we're going to look at or go after records, something that the Attorney General made an announcement about, the President has spoken to, is very clear evidence of exactly that.
See this as a freedom of press.
So, bottom line, Kevin, isn't this kind of untenable at this point? Like, you know, obviously they didn't care that they were, you know, obviously they don't care about the First Amendment. Biden has probably been bowing down to the CIA on this, but isn't it untenable at this point with this report that even the corporate media is mentioning?
Yeah, you'll notice that Jen Psaki refuses to defend it. She won't give even a boilerplate.
And by the way,
answer.
I should say that was before this report came out. So this report.
But I don't think it's changed. I mean, as
Right.
far as I can tell, there's no viral clip that we're sharing today of her being confronted over this matter. So I imagine the White House correspondents took this as the latest crack they were going to have at this issue, and that they could bring it up again, but they were going to get the same thing from the Biden administration. I mean, that Al Jazeera reporter mentions that she spent months trying to get some kind of a response. I mean, we're just trying to get the Biden administration to justify this. Why is this still going? Tell us why you think this should still be happening. They're not even trying to get them to say, we oppose Julian Assange's prosecution. They're just saying, look, because this keeps going on and people are outraged, what do you have to say to the people around the world, the press organizations around the world that are opposed to this? And they have no response. You just get crickets. And then Matthew Lee is a journalist who is part of the correspondence group that is regularly covering the State Department. And you've seen him question Ned Price, who is the secretary, the spokesperson for the State Department, who speaks on this. And he's been asked, and Matthew Lee has tried to get him to talk about this subject. And it's the same thing. And keep passing it off and saying that's something for the Justice Department to take care of. Direct your questions to the Justice Department. This is an ongoing investigation. And so they refuse to say anything about why Julian Assange continues to be prosecuted. They act like they're innocent bystanders. It's much like, you know, when Vice President Kamala Harris was outraged that the people are in the Border Patrol are riding horses and using whips. And she's like, oh my, that's incredible. That's awful. That's terrible. Same with Biden. And then it's like, well, that's your administration. You're leading that administration. You're not just like from the outside looking in. You're the people making these decisions. These people are making the decisions that are keeping Julian Assange in jail, and they can drop the charges. And from the top down, from Biden to Kamala Harris to the State Department, Antony Blinken as Secretary of State, and then Attorney General Merrick Garland, all of them can come out on the record and say today why they think this should keep going. And I think they have an obligation, at the very least, to defend this instead of being cowards and acting like this isn't happening on their watch. And the time is running out, I think, for this ruse to keep going, because I think at some point, I have to think at some point it's going to crack, that they're not going to be able to keep doing this, because you're seeing more and more corporate journalists, more and more journalists within the establishment say something. Although I will say, isn't it funny that on the days that it looks like we should have sympathy for Julian Assange, on the days when the news cycle comes out with something that makes it so it's really difficult to be someone who pushes smear campaigns against Julian Assange, that you just see silence from these Democrats. You just see all the regular cast of characters that normally has opinions, the ones that were guilty of pursuing and propagating this nonsense about him being a Russian plant, that they just clam up and they have nothing. They don't have anything to add. Their opinion stops there. They don't even go to the trouble to try to discredit the reporting and say that, or to like make it fit their own worldview. They just decide they're going to ignore it, push it off to the side. It'll go away in the next day or two. And they're probably right. But I mean, I think it's pretty telling that they don't have anything in response, because it's pretty much an admission that everything they're saying is a total fabrication.
That's a really good segue. And I want to be fair to Congressman Khanna. I interviewed him on Saturday. I recorded it on Saturday, and this came out Sunday. If I would have had this before I interviewed him, I would have specifically grilled him on this. But regardless, I interviewed him on a bunch of things. I asked him at the end about Assange. Frankly, I thought his answers were kind of cringe. But I want to highlight, we'll play two clips. The first one, Colin, if you have it, about it doesn't seem he could distinguish what is actively participating in hacking versus just urging a source to get you documents. An independent journalist who certainly is not anywhere near in the same league as Julian Assange, I would definitely ask you and other progressives to really move this up the priority list, regardless of what you think of Julian Assange. This is journalistic, First Amendment journalistic freedom. If they could go after Assange and essentially criminalize whistleblowing, they will go after myself, other more high-profile independent reporters for just about anything. And if that becomes normalized, that's just as dangerous as the things people were ranting about that Trump was doing. So I really hope you guys could reassess that and maybe fight a little louder. Last thing you want, if you had a response.
Yeah, no, I agree that we have to defend people's right to publish. I, again, draw a distinction between people who are actively engaged in supporting hacking or getting classified information. I don't think people should be doing that proactively, and that should be prosecuted. But if they are simply recipients, passive recipients from a source of that information, and they publish it, that's the Pentagon Papers, that's the Afghan Papers.
I mean, you think the Washington Post was saying, yeah, send it to me if you want. Obviously, they were actively encouraging Daniel Ellsberg, who's considered a hero. So I think that's a bit of a distinction without a difference.
Well, I mean, I think legally there's a way to define it.
So first of all, and Jen spotted this, I said it wrong. Assange isn't the whistleblower. He was a publisher. So, I wish I could correct it now. But obviously, I meant, it's basically criminalizing publishers who might publish information from whistleblowers. But I just found what he said, and he said something else that we'll get to. It's obviously a smart person. Debate whether he's weak or not. So I don't know. It just seems like he's saying like, oh, well, if they're supporting the hacking or, actively encouraging it, I mean, that's not illegal to actively encourage a whistleblower. He wasn't participating in it. So it just seems like if that's his understanding of it, I don't know what half of Congress's understanding of it is. But did you read it the same way I did? We lost your audio.
Sorry, I can't, again, being considerate, and it backfires. So, I think I agree with you that it's a distinction without a difference, that basically this is what media organizations are routinely engaged in. This thing of supporting like getting hacked information or getting classified information, it's what journalists do all the time. Some of the more successful journalists, take someone like Jason Leopold at BuzzFeed, who's been doing constant work on the investigation by Mueller into Trump. I mean, what's he doing? He's trying to get classified information every single day. And I doubt Ro Khanna would say that Jason Leopold is somebody who should be put on trial for prosecution for Espionage Act violations. And I'd also say that to people who are Democrats, particularly like Ro Khanna, who believe that it's wrong to seek out hacked materials for publication, they should go back and look at a ruling that came down back in, it was 2 years ago. And this was actually in a case that bears relevance to everything we've talked about today, because this was the Democratic National Committee trying to hold WikiLeaks and Julian Assange liable for publishing information that Russian agents were accused of stealing, the Podesta emails. And John Kodal, the federal judge, said that the lawsuit, basically, he went and he highlighted the Pentagon Papers, and he said that there was a heavy presumption against the constitutional validity of prior restraints. Well, what does that mean? The ability of the government to suppress the publication of information. It's why Richard Nixon wasn't able to stop the Pentagon Papers. So he said, whether or not WikiLeaks knew the materials were obtained illegally, they were protected by the First Amendment. This is his quote. The First Amendment prevents such liability in the same way it would preclude liability for press outlets that publish materials of public interest despite defects in the way the materials were obtained, so long as the disseminator did not participate in any wrongdoing in obtaining the materials in the first place. And so since nobody is suggesting that WikiLeaks hacked those materials, those Podesta emails, to publish them, they can freely publish the emails online and share them for us, and we can get the public interest value from them, which we did, showing how the Democratic Party was basically rigging the primary in a fashion that favored Hillary Clinton. So that's something that's fair. Everything that Julian Assange did was fair. I'll let you play the next clip from Ro.
But first, Kevin, Chris Cuomo told us that it's illegal for us to read those emails. If everyone remembers that ridiculousness.
Yeah. Chris Cuomo's got his own problems. So
like a sexual harassment case now.
Right. Yep. So this next answer from Ro, and honestly, like, credit to him, he came on, that it's more for most of the progressives that won't go near any independent outlets. The first answer I kind of just brought up, like, why is it so difficult to get progressives on the record about this? I mean, Bernie basically didn't touch it during the campaign. Nina Turner, I don't know. You know, I was going to ask her this in our interview, but I was cut off after 15 minutes. I thought I had a half hour. I digress. But you don't hear any progressives talking about this. His answer, I found kind of buying the Russiagate nonsense. So, Colin, if you could play it. And why is this not more of a topic among you and other progressives to challenge President Biden to end this farce of a prosecution?
I've been on the record on this, that I thought that the indictment was overbroad. I believe that you should be prosecuted if you're actually engaged in the hacking of information on a computer server, or actually facilitating someone to get classified information. But if you are engaged as in publishing and you are the recipient of that information, then I feel that an indictment is too broad and can have chilling effects on the First Amendment and on journalists. So I don't defend Assange from a perspective of substance or morality as others do. But I do think that the indictment was overbroad, and I have First Amendment concerns on the prosecution.
What are your more morality concerns? The release. I mean,
Well,
he released war crimes.
I mean, I have to look through everything. I mean, I don't want to. I haven't studied his, everything, what he's done or hasn't done.
So this kind of, I don't want to compare Ro Khanna to Barry Weiss, so let's be fair. This kind of reminded me of when Barry Weiss went on Joe Rogan. By the way, Joe Rogan right now is sharing clips comparing vaccine mandates to the Holocaust. So maybe I won't be invited. I won't be invited on Joe Rogan, but it's just vile and disgusting. I get the whole I'm an idiot and I don't know anything charm, but yeah, this whole comparing mandates to not kill yourself to the genocide of 6 billion people, I'm not okay with that. Anyway, when Barry Weiss went on Joe Rogan and was shitting on Tulsi Gabbard, which it came out, there was
probably worthwhile.
some validity to. But then when Rogan said well, what specifically, she's like, oh, well, I'd have to look into it. Obviously,
well, this was way back when. This wasn't, to be clear,
right?
Not
so
recent.
I assume his morality bit is about quote unquote working with the Russians, because I think he's kind of alluded to that before. But I kind of just said you mean the morality of war crimes, releasing information on war crimes? I don't know. It just seems, again, not that he is representing all of the progressives in Congress, but my assumption is this is a prevalent view even among progressives.
Yeah, and it's not that much different than what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez told The Intercept, which was to say, or I think it was the interview with Jeremy Scahill for Deconstructed, where she's like, I have concerns about Julian Assange. And it's what are those? Let's get them out in the open. And then when you ask, they say, oh, well, I haven't studied it that closely. I don't really know. They're not confident. They don't feel like they can actually engage because they're actually not spending that much time on it. And both answers are very troubling. I mean, let's pull out. Let's just, it's great to talk about Julian Assange, but let's just talk about the fact that the Justice Department has this tool of the Espionage Act in general. And there is no oversight or accountability, and there seems to be a very small amount of interest in reining it in. Now, there have been pieces of legislation introduced called Espionage Act reform in order to deal with it. But what happens is people like Dianne Feinstein, Senator, and some of the other people look at it, and they read it, and they say, this is going to make it possible for WikiLeaks and Julian Assange to get away with attacking the United States. And so we need to write in all this language that excludes them and ruins everything we're trying to do here and just undermines the point of pursuing Espionage Act reform in the first place, because you're trying to establish it. What you need to do, I believe that you should just abolish the Espionage Act. It's more than 100 years old. Well, it's more than 100 years old. It's 104 years old. It's a 1917 law. It's always been used to target dissent. But if it's going to still be on the books and you're going to quote unquote fix it, if it can be fixed, then you need to do something to narrow it down and get it back to the idea that it's only for people who act as spies, that it can't be used against journalists, people who are involved in journalism. Just taking a piece of information from someone and publishing it on the internet isn't espionage. So there needs to be something, it needs to be apparently written into the law to stop prosecutors at the Justice Department from using this as a sledgehammer to destroy people's lives. And apparently there's just not that much interest at all in the Senate or the House in truly addressing this issue. And which I think is one of the more fundamental press freedom issues of our time. I put it up there along with the fact that journalists can have trouble going across the borders and coming into different airports because they could be stopped and have their electronics rifled through and have their Fourth Amendment rights entirely violated, where they take them in the back. You don't see what the agents are doing, and then they come back and they've made copies, or they've actually taken your devices and you can come back later and get them, and they don't have to have reasonable suspicion to do that, it seems. So that's one issue. And then there's the Espionage Act reform issue, and there's not much interest. Like, I'm glad that Roe engages you and talks to you on this question. It's really good of him, but he was indicted. Julian Assange was indicted in April 2019. And then in May 2019, they added the Espionage Act violations, which every single press freedom organization, almost all of the editors of major newspapers opposed. He's got to have a better answer at this point.
Well,
yeah,
go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I was just going to talk more about the issue of, in addition to Congress seemingly not knowing the specifics of what's going on with Julian Assange, what we are doing to Julian Assange, but also other journalists. It's, I'm sure it's distressing to all three of us who are on this stream as journalists, because this really sets a precedent for all of us. But as I shared with you last time you were on, Kevin, I asked a New York Times lawyer who is responsible for vetting New York Times stories, etc., this question, and he was basically giving kind of the same answer as Roe, as Representative Khanna, in saying, well, it depends. There are some people who think it's, First Amendment freedoms, that it's just publishing. There are other people who think, that Julian Assange assisted Chelsea Manning, etc., and was very much waffling on this answer. But clearly, all press, all people need to be very concerned about this. And Colin, if you can pop up that section of the article that talks about Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald.
Oh yeah, we haven't got this yet.
Yeah, so this is so shocking and horrifying. And again, everybody from the New York Times to, small time folks, small time media companies like us need to be concerned. So it says, still chafing at the limits in place, top intelligence officials lobbied the White House to redefine WikiLeaks and some high-profile journalists as information brokers, which would have opened up the use of more investigative tools against them, potentially paving the way for their prosecution, according to former officials. It was a step in the direction of showing a court, if we got that far, that we were dealing with agents of a foreign power, a former senior counterintelligence official said. Among the journalists, some U.S. officials wanted to designate as information brokers were Glenn Greenwald, then a columnist for The Guardian, and Laura Poitras, a documentary filmmaker who had both been instrumental in publishing documents provided by Snowden. Is WikiLeaks a journalistic outlet? Are Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald truly journalists? The former official said. We tried to change the definition of them, and I preached this to the White House and got rejected. So I believe this was in the Obama years. Kevin, if you can speak more on this.
I'm flabbergasted by that. I preached this to the White House and they rejected. This is a person who is insistent, even after failing to win this redefinition battle, that Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald should not have been given journalistic protections as they were working on the files from Edward Snowden. So that's really something to take a moment and sit with it, because I think that says a lot about where we are as a country and the kind of rot that is happening within institutions, particularly within intelligence agencies, who will use the Constitution to sell an image of their agencies that is not real. And in fact, within it, they have total contempt for democracy. They'd rather be partnering and working with authoritarian figures because those are easier to manage and it's less messy. Democracy is much more messy. Freedom of the press is much more messy for them because people don't march in lockstep to the beat of their drum. So it becomes a lot more difficult for them to sell what they do. So just the idea that someone could be an information broker if they're a journalist obviously has to be resisted. It comes, in my mind, I'm thinking, so this is like basically taking arms trafficking or arms smuggling and then saying that like, these are state secrets, so a journalist can be accused of information trafficking because they're not supposed to have access to these materials. And that's just trying to come up with some way to deal with our online digitized world in which it's so easy for information to change hands, and they're very desperate. But if they succeed in this, I don't think sometimes it's overdone, but it's not wrong to say newspeak here and do a callback to George Orwell's 1984. If they succeed in this newspeak, then they're basically creating a way for the government to justify prosecuting journalists for doing national security reporting. And it's been said all along that the prosecution against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange was just an attack on national security journalism. It's all a pretext, because once it starts with him, they're going to go after other journalists. They'll be emboldened. And to me, within all of this, we're not that far removed. It was only a couple of weeks ago that we marked the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks. And I look at all of this and I think, when I think about the CIA, that we had a torture program. We had people who were being rendered and brought to black site prisons. And that was an issue where the Obama administration decided they were going to move forward without looking backward. So nobody was put on trial. Nobody was ever charged with any crimes. In fact, the people who were architects, James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen, contract psychologists who really had very little expertise, were indemnified to where they could not be prosecuted even if the Justice Department wanted to. They got paid over $80 million for what they did. So that was a chapter, and we just, we did a torture study that the Senate put out and moved on. And then Obama's having the CIA hold Terror Tuesday meetings and put militants on kill lists and authorize them to be shot by Hellfire missiles with remote control aircraft. And that just becomes something where people shrug. They accept that that's now normal for what the CIA is doing, for selecting and putting people on kill lists. And I just suppose that it's not that far removed for the CIA members of the agency to then train their minds to say, well, what about people who we don't like, who we think are hostile to the agency? What about journalists? What about even maybe activists? What about deciding that those that are effective, who are challenging us, we could deem them as hostile entities, or in this example, we're talking about information brokers, or both of them are in the report. We can reclassify them, and then we'll open up a whole batch of authorities that say that we can go screw with them and destroy them and do sabotage. And also, if we would like, maybe we might even put them on planes and render them and bring them back to the United States for some trial, some show trial, and they'll be political prisoners. I mean, people really need to sit back and think about this. This is not about Julian Assange. This is about what this agency is doing without anyone. And Khanna has very little power, so I'm not going to lay this at his feet. But the people who do have seniority and authority, the Gang of Eight in the Congress, who are the ones that are told when the intelligence agencies decide that they're going to engage in warrantless wiretapping or engage in torture or engage in these drone strikes. They're the ones that need to step up and do something about this. These people who are the unnamed officials, the more than 30 unnamed officials who witnessed all of this conduct by CIA officials who were very proud to go after Assange, they have an obligation to come out beyond the Isikoff report and talk further about what they observed, and to maybe even lend their names, lend their titles to what they're saying, to say that this is wrong and the charges against Julian Assange should be dropped because the whole thing is tainted by the actions of the CIA, which led to the indictment. There would be no indictment without the actions of the CIA.
Well, I also want to point out, I think everything you're saying is right, but there's another element of this that I just think is really shadowy, but prevalent. I mean, just look at our headline, Kevin. If we would have put Julian Assange's name in the headline, we'd be lucky if we got 120 to 150 live viewers. It's the same thing for Amazon, the topic of Amazon, other topics. I mean, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, it is not a conspiracy at this point. It's facts. It's across the board. Many indie outlets, anti-war outlets, anti-capitalists, whatever the case may be, they are suppressing certain topics so that people will not know. Then, I mean, it's not a huge audience we have, but trust me, if we would have put his name in the headline, it would be much worse because we've done it before. So you take that with the fact that, you know, yeah, I saw a segment on CNN, I saw a segment on MSNBC, but like basically for 3 years, New York Times, Washington Post, Daily Beast, all the digital outlets, all kind of the Washington, you know, Beltway media crowd have basically been silent on this because essentially, oh, Assange with the Russians, this and that. So you have big tech basically suppressing information and censoring certain topics. And it's not just Assange. I mean, it's many topics. Stephen Donziger as well. And then you have media outlets that I criticize them every day. I mean, they are corporate media. But at the same time, when you have something this blinking red lights obvious, and if it wasn't obvious to them before, it should be obvious now. I just think there seems to be this entire apparatus around this particular topic where nobody is willing to do the right thing, whether it be big tech, actual journalists in the industry. I mean, aside from Ryan Grimm and a couple others, and obviously the independent outlets, but Ryan Grimm has been writing a lot and doing videos about Assange, you, of course. It just seems like there is a just coalition of silence. And the only reason I can think of is because they don't actually care about, they're not actually rigid and absolute in their First Amendment journalistic rights argument if it's somebody that they don't like or isn't a part of their tribe.
Yeah. I think it's twofold what you're pointing to. So to be clear, you've got the people who seem apathetic and ignorant. Like they could really care less what happens to Julian Assange. And those people, unfortunately, sometimes get booked on shows and they share their punditry and they don't have a clue about what happened to Julian Assange as far as this case goes and how it's unfolded. They can talk about what's the headline of the day that they've been asked to come comment. They can say some things that are vague, but beyond that, you know, you might as well have asked them to tell you how planes work or something. They don't really know what they're talking about. And then you've got the people who are so concerned about the backlash that they're going to get. They're beholden to the culture that has been propagated by the national security state. And that's what I'm concerned about the most, more so than the apathetic and ignorant people, because we can sort of deal with them by just continuing to do the work we do. But the people who know better, who are actively fueling what the national security state is doing, and whether they know it or not, you know, witting or unwitting, I mean, they're playing into the narrative that's being perpetuated, or they're afraid to challenge it because of what could happen to them if they do challenge it. I mean, I imagine that for like a lot of things that become third rail, Khanna is concerned about what he might say that's going to upset someone in one of the alphabet agencies that has many databases of information that are collecting intelligence on a daily basis. You know, he's afraid that something might be produced that's going to bear out that what they were saying could possibly be true, and then he's going to be exposed as being wrong about Julian Assange. But I don't think that you have to be that concerned. I think it's pretty clear at this point what is going on. You know, we know all kinds of everything about Julian Assange and WikiLeaks because of how long this has been unfolding for well over a decade. And when you just take the last 5 years, going back to 2016, of what they tried to throw at him in order to smear him as a Russian plant, even that's been proven to be false. And so at this point, We need people to take an interest in figuring out the truth of what's going on in this case. Unlike the parliaments of European countries, nobody in Congress sees it as important to follow what is unfolding with the extradition proceedings. They don't send staff members. That's incredible to me, because when I cover the extradition hearing, there are people who are in, say, Germany or Spain or Italy or even the UK who attend the proceedings virtually or sometimes in person if they're in the UK, and want to know how the US and the Crown Prosecution Service is pursuing this case against Assange. They think it's important. It's a global matter that they have to be knowledgeable about. But that's not something that members of Congress think. They think that this is just completely insignificant, at least up until he gets brought to the United States and is put on trial. And then I suppose maybe they're going to take it more seriously. But they just simply do not follow it. I don't think people like Khanna and others are actually keeping tabs on this. And some of that, I think, has to do with the culture that has been created by the CIA and other institutions that says, if you're on this side, if you're on the side of Julian Assange, then you're against America. And they're basically bowing to it in the way that, it's kind of a McCarthyist kind of a thing, right? Like, if you're on the side of Assange, we're going to smear you and say that you're un-American.
Right. One of the things about this piece is, it's incredible reporting. It's really great reporting. But of course, none of us are surprised. And I think, a lot of us had speculated over the years that Julian knew, to put it mildly, that he was in great danger. And a lot of people speculated on whether or not he and or WikiLeaks had some kind of kill switch ready. And so through this article, we learn, and Colin, if you can pop this piece up here. So this is from the article. So even Assange appeared to fear assassination. Some Vault 7 material, which CIA officials believed to be even more damaging than the files WikiLeaks had published, had been distributed among Assange's colleagues with instructions to publish it if one of them were killed. So that, that shows us right there that, yeah, they did have a kill switch and potentially, I guess, some still unreleased Vault 7 material. Have you heard any more about this point?
Well, so I don't think that that's unique to the Vault 7 materials. And so it may not really have much bearing on whether the CIA was engaged in these operations or not. Because I think it was also a standard within WikiLeaks to always have this kind of a backup to a backup sort of a way to get the information out if Julian Assange was arrested or imprisoned, or if something happened to the staff members, or if the site was taken down by the U.S. government. And so they've always had these plans in place that would essentially say, well, what it does is it creates a kind of detente, right, between WikiLeaks and the U.S. government. In the same way that like people can do that with nuclear weapons. Basically, if you attack me, I'm going to take this step. You don't want that to happen. So that creates basically a cost-benefit analysis that the U.S. government has to do to decide how far they really want to go. How much are they willing to risk? And this can happen actually in cases where this is one of the problems I think that they have with bringing Julian Assange to the U.S. and putting him on trial. He knows a lot about what goes on in U.S. agencies. And I imagine there's a fair amount of people. Reason why he's probably not charged for the release of Vault 7 materials is that they're afraid of gray mail. They don't want Julian Assange and his legal team to talk about these files in a public court setting, any aspects of them at all. And so they've tried to keep that out of the case. And up to now, they've been successful in doing so. So, I have to say, though, I was stunned by this report. I can't say that I wasn't surprised by what was in its contents. I knew that the CIA was waging a war on WikiLeaks, but I didn't know the specifics in my mind. So to have those specifics are hugely important, because then I can speak with some clarity to people about what I'm saying. It's one thing to tell people the CIA is waging a war on WikiLeaks, and Mike Pompeo thinks WikiLeaks is a non-state hostile intelligence agency, which I wrote. It's another thing now to have this wealth of detail about what the CIA was actually doing with its resources and its personnel, and to now say that this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is a conspiracy. This is actually something that unfolded within the ranks of the US government. And whether the Trump administration rejected it or not, didn't want to have anything to do with the assassination plans, they exist. They were drawn up. They look as bad as the plans that were drawn up to assassinate Fidel Castro or any other world leaders in history. I mean, back in the 70s, there's a big deal of like the CIA is not going to be in the business of assassinating people. I don't know if we're ever going to get back to it, but it was a huge scandal back then, 50 years ago, close to 50 years ago. And it should be now. People really should be concerned that the CIA is getting back into the killing business. But like I said already, if you're killing people with drones, how far removed is it to turn around and decide that you're going to assassinate the political enemies of the CIA? It's probably pretty easy for those officials psychologically to go from the men on the baseball cards who have Arab, South Asian, or Muslim sounding names to people who are political enemies, to go from the racism that makes them decide that those men are not deserving of due process. And then the creep occurs that now says, okay, journalists and activists I don't like, who I think are lefty or commie or aligned with the Russians or aligned with the Chinese or the Iranians or the Venezuelans, those people don't deserve rights either. Let's go assassinate them and bring them to trial.
My last question, and we could have you on again because obviously there's so much that goes into this. I mean, the bottom line, the human element is Julian Assange is a human being who's been psychologically and likely physically tortured. He's basically been detained for almost a decade now. What's the latest on? I mean, I don't know if you have a straight line to him, but as far as you know, what is his condition mentally? I know he lost a lot of weight physically. What is his condition, just mentally, physically right now?
I'd encourage people who are watching the stream to stay updated on Stella Morris's. Stella Morris is Julian Assange's partner, and she posts updates through Crowd Justice, which is the platform used to raise funds for Julian Assange's legal defense. And there she's regularly providing updates on Julian Assange's condition and the latest in the battle to try and win his extradition case, also force charges to be dropped. I imagine there's going to be a whole lot of actions coming through happening. There's probably going to be days of action in the US and globally, especially with this report that I think could be really tremendously useful for the Assange legal team. I don't have a fresh update on Julian Assange's condition, but yes, what you're saying is true, that he's been deteriorating. And even though this mental health condition was acknowledged as being something that was not good, that he was in poor health, the district court judge, at the behest of the US government, decided to keep him in jail without allowing him bail. Did this during a pandemic, a global pandemic, when we know people incarcerated have been at particular risk. Jails and prisons have been the source of some of the most intense outbreaks in the United States because you've got guards coming in and out of the facilities. That's the way that it spreads. It's also the way drugs get spread in the jails, but that's another issue. And so there's that. And she still kept him in jail and did it in service to the U.S. government, even though she believed it would be oppressive for health reasons to extradite him to the United States. It makes no sense. There's no consistency on the part of her ruling, and he remains there, and he's not likely to be allowed bail during or after the appeal hearing. So he's likely there until there's a decision on the appeal, and then we'll see. I suppose the appeals court will have to make a decision if Julian Assange prevails again. But he's basically stuck here, and I think the question people have to chew over right now I mean, try not to be too cynical. I mean, try to engage, recognize there's a man who's in jail. His life needs to be saved. He has 2 children. He's got a partner. He should be able to be free and live with his family and recover from the ordeal that he suffered over the last decade. Recognize that there's a human being there, and truly consider the fact that right now the Democrats have a president in office in Joe Biden who called Julian Assange a high-tech terrorist, who has allowed all of this to go on his watch. He's now responsible for the information he knows about this case, and he can have the charges dismissed. He can urge the Justice Department to end this case because it is political. So you can't say he can't interfere in it. Don't act like there's some sort of code he has to follow. He can't interfere with. It's all political. It started because of politics. It can end because of politics. And so all he has to do is say, drop the charges, or Merrick Garland drops the charges. And that's what should be done. That's where we are at, and we should be focused basically on the fact that Joe Biden likely would be willing to leave Julian Assange in this legal limbo and let him continue to suffer. And he may not even be in favor of this. The thing that I hate about this the most is that Donald Trump's people were for prosecuting Julian Assange. They were open about it. Mike Pompeo tells you why he thinks Julian Assange should be brought and his head should be put on a pike. But these guys won't even tell you why this is continuing. They hide. They just keep hiding. And I'm afraid that they're just going to allow this to all unfold, and then it's going to get to the end at the Supreme Court, and then the Foreign Office in the UK is going to have an opportunity to sign off on it. And they're going to get some communication from the White House, and they're going to say, you know what, we don't want you to go through with this. And there's going to be people who are aghast, and they're stunned. They're like, what just happened? This has been happening for the last 3 to 4 years. So you mean now they're not going to stand behind it? And the point will be that they got what they wanted. They were able to further destroy, further tarnish the image of Assange. And it's not necessary to bring him to the U.S. and put him on trial. They got the rulings they wanted in the legal courts in the UK in this extradition case. I mean, right now, they can't drop the case against Assange because they have a problem when it comes to extradition. They have to see if they can overturn this ruling so that it's not a barrier against future extradition cases. But if they win in the UK courts, then they can say, all right, we don't really want to put him on trial anymore. And then that can be that. And then everything that Julian Assange just suffered, there's no justice, there's no accountability. It just ends with a whimper. And they'll say as much about it as they've said about this report from Yahoo News. And it'll be a travesty. It'll be just as bad as anything we've talked about the CIA doing. But that's the way I see it potentially playing out. And it's terribly troubling to me.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Kevin Gotstola. Definitely check out Shadowproof. Kevin does great work there. Where can people find it?
Yeah, shadowproof.com, but I do a newsletter at thedissenter.org, THEDISSENTER.org, where it's free and everyone can get the updates and things I write about WikiLeaks, Assange, and whistleblowers through that newsletter. So thank you for giving me this time. Great conversation. Glad to be able to dig into this in great detail for as long as we did. Thank you.
And by the way,
thank you so much, Kevin.
By the way, as Jen and I have said, there's a lot of people screaming on YouTube these days. There's not a lot of Kevins doing, kind of the unsexy work of reporting on Assange and many other things. I know you did things on Daniel Hale and others. So if you can, check out his work, The Dissenter.
Yeah.
And Shadowproof. And follow.
Yeah. And if I could just quickly say, it really counts to not engage in factionalism, because when you want to get your work out to a wide audience, when you're not pissing off people every other day, you really find that people are receptive to your work. That's all I'll say.
Got it.
Makes sense.
All right.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Well, we want to have you back again soon.
So that was great. I don't know. I mean, obviously, in terms of these news stories, as you and I know, and stuff we've broken, the first couple of days really counts to make it big. I would anticipate, maybe protests happening as a result of this. But we've had a lot of protests for Julian Assange all over the country. His brother, father came to do a tour of America this year, a couple months ago, I believe. And I do think Kevin's right as far as that the Trump administration didn't hide it. If this came out and Trump was still president, they would just say fake news and be done with it. But the Biden administration and his press secretary and all those lackeys kind of just refusing to talk about it is just as bad in my view. So, we need to keep this in the news because honestly, you basically have clear evidence that because WikiLeaks was revealing U.S. CIA methods of hacking, they created a fake charade of an indictment against him and basically concocted a crime out of political vengeance. And that can't stand, regardless of what you think of Julian Assange. And I don't agree with Khanna and these other people. I don't know about the morality, blah, 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 blah.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with the propaganda. So people who haven't looked deeply into this or haven't followed someone like Kevin here, and these Congress people get like briefings and stuff. So they just hear what the spooks are telling them and what the propaganda outlets, on mainstream media are saying. And so they repeat that. And so as you heard Ro kind of say, to you, as everyone heard, that he's like, I don't really know, to be honest, which is a major paraphrase. But yeah, he doesn't know. And we can safely bet that the vast majority of Congress, including those who are super vehemently against Assange, probably don't know. Like,
yeah,
you think they do? No, I don't think they do at all.
Ro Khanna knows the details of Julian Assange, the indictment.
No,
so
because I think because they've really done a great job of muddying the waters and making it sound like Assange had an actual hand in the hacking. I don't think Ro Khanna is like outright lying to us. I think...
my point is if you have an issue, if you say I don't agree with people who stand with them on morality, and then I ask you, well, what is your issue on morality? And then you say, well, I need to look into it, this and that. Well, if you think he's done something immoral or treasonous, even though he's not an American citizen, you would know what it is. What do you think was immoral, right?
Well,
so I think he was kind of playing dumb on that a little bit.
We can't get into his head. I am giving him some more credit because, again, they're hearing straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, straight from these intelligence folks, things that aren't true, because that sways their opinions of things and the way that they would answer these questions. So I don't think we can know. Right. I would be very discouraged if indeed what you're saying is the case. So we'll see. I found one thing that Kevin said, well, it was all very interesting, but something that I didn't know and I want to explore more about. I don't know if you have the same understanding, but that they need to get through this like extradition situation with the UK before the Biden admin could like potentially drop this because of the precedent that it would set. So that I find very interesting, and I want to know more about that.
Save it again. I'm not following you.
What Kevin said at the end there, that it could, so this extradition case, whatever, could set a precedent. So before Biden could kind of safely or reasonably drop this, that would need to be figured out first, and then then Biden could choose to drop it, which I did not know was
unless
part
I'm
of
missing
the process.
I don't know about that. I mean, the bottom line is this is based on UK law, not American law. So
right. So it's the collaboration, I guess you could say. It seemed like that's what Kevin was getting at. Like if we to kind of move forward or like whatever next time, this communication, this extradition piece between the two countries needs to be figured out first before then Biden could safely drop. I don't know what your understanding was, but that was my understanding.
My understanding is a judge ruled he cannot be extradited. I thought the reason she gave was a cop out, but the bottom line is a UK judge ruled she can't be extradited. Like in America, there is the opportunity to appeal in the UK. So
Right.
I don't believe that there's anything other than the appeal process.
Well, so you heard what he said, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. So yeah, I want to look more into that.
Yeah,
I don't.
Maybe I didn't connect with it. What he meant by it, because to me, putting aside all that, even in the U.S. and the U.K. on appeal, they have released terrorist suspects.
Right.
So the fact that he is still in jail, even though there's been a ruling he can't be extradited on appeal, is unusual in itself. He's not, the reason he's a flight risk or any of that is not because of flight risk. He's the most surveilled person on earth. Is because they don't want him to ever see the light of day. That's the reality. The U.S. I'm talking about.
Sure. So we need to get more clarification from Kevin. I don't know what you folks took away from it, but that's definitely a piece that
So explain to me real quick. What maybe I am missing it. He said that there is a process.
Well, there's no sense in talking about it on air before we have clarification.
Okay.
I think.
I got it.
Yeah, but I found that very, very interesting. Definitely a point that I had never heard anyone bring up. So I'm fascinated by that.
I want to say one thing before we move on to the last topic. Jen, did you notice when we didn't put Julian Assange's name in the headline, our viewership went up? There is no way if we put Julian Assange's name in the headline, if we would have got over 300 live viewers.
I mean, we don't have a true control for this study, but sure, we can.
Well, I'm saying to the eye test, based on previous streams we've done on Julian Assange, which got like 150 live viewers, we got up to, I mean, it's not amazing, but we got over 300 at one point by not putting his name in the headline, by not having a thumbnail. So I just find that interesting. If our theory is, and I think it's well educated, that outlets like YouTube are, whatever the term is, keyword list or SEO bans or suppression based on terms. I mean, we could look back to streams we've done on Julian Assange. They did incredibly poorly. The shorter clips that we posted from those live streams did incredibly poorly too. I see your eyes reprimanding me.
I'm not reprimanding you. I'm saying we don't have a control, so I can't definitively say it's not. It's not a real study.
I didn't really do well in statistics, but I think based on previous streams, it's very clear. The reason we said this will be hidden is because it would be hidden. But more importantly, as an experiment, let's see if we don't mention his name, don't put up an image, if the viewership will be better. And at least in this case, it certainly was compared to other streams. What?
I'm going to conduct a real study. No, okay. I'm really.
Well, we'll do it with other things.
We need to do some A/B testing.
Okay. So I want to move on, and we won't go that long. And by the way, keep the super chats coming. We'll read them at the end. So I interviewed Khanna on Saturday. Just so you know, it came together very quickly. I explained some of it in the members video we did that I posted. If you're a member to Status Coup, hint, hint, we're at 1,809 members. So we really, really need to get this number up. Our goal is 2,000, and then obviously to keep growing. We have slipped because of COVID, people losing their jobs, because of people not liking our views on certain things and taking their ball and going home, and not canceling their memberships, whatever. But how we are funded is through you, and we're still actively trying to work on planning our next reporting trips in the field. So hopefully, if you like the content we do in the field, even when we're home. StatusCoup.com/join. But
more importantly, you get things as part of this. For example, Jordan takes you behind the scenes of you guys might have seen, in addition to the interview that Jordan did with Rep Khanna, he also had a very detailed and thorough and ballsy back and forth with Roe, which was really, really cool. I thought that was great. But Jordan takes you behind the scenes and does a video diary specifically for members. So if you want some behind the scenes of Jordan's thoughts behind that and et cetera.
Just to clarify, when I shot it, it was Friday night before we scheduled the interview, but I was actually taking viewers through our Twitter DM back and forth because we had a little testy DM.
Yeah, that's what I said. It's from the Twitter.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I
Yeah.
thought you were talking about taking people behind the scenes of the interview.
No. I said there's, we all saw a back and forth exchange. And so this is the behind the scenes of that. And yeah, so and also there were behind the scenes DMs. So it's very
Jen,
intriguing. Can you let me sell to people, for God's sake?
Oh, I was going to say,
let me talk.
Not to gross you out, but I took wax out of my ear earlier. So maybe I do have a hearing problem.
Yeah. I think you do have a hearing problem. Yeah, so it's, and that's just one of the many benefits that you get to the Ask Me Anything call, which we did last week. We did 2, and we might do 2 again in October. We'll see. But that you can truly ask us anything, and we reveal way too much info. On top of that, you get access to our members only Discord. So there's a ton of stuff that you get. And you're also having a hand in all of our reporting. Like literally because of our membership, that's the only way we're able to report and remain independent, as we always will. So statuscoup.com/join.
Correct. So yeah, it came together very quickly. Like he said to me Friday night, I asked him like, all right, we're going back and forth in a direct message. You want to just do an interview? He said, yeah. Would you be free Monday? I said, yeah. And then Saturday morning, so fucking annoying. I always say to you, Jen, like just when I want to take time off, I can't take time off. So Saturday morning, I have a DM. Can you do it now? And like, I had, my in-laws were coming over because my wife and I were going to go with them picking. What were we picking?
Not daisies, wildflowers and sunflowers.
Picking wildflowers, which is wonderful.
Jordan's like, I'm going to go picking daisies. And it turns out there were no daisies.
There were no daisies. It was wildflowers.
I don't know if you thought like all flowers are daisies.
So my in-laws came over and they had to wait because I was doing the interview with him last minute. Then my aunt and uncle were coming to where I live. So it's just a whole long day. Anyway, listen, to preface it, I thought a lot of the things I disagree with most of what he said, to be frank, but you got to give the man credit because there's, I have been criticizing progressives. There's been a whole lot of channels. It's become an industry just bashing people like Roe. At least he's going on channels. I would like AOC and others to also make themselves available. I don't really, we're not going to change our topics to get access. Like Status Coup is not built on interviews with Khanna or AOC. I mean, I still think AOC and the squad are folding like a cheap tent. I'm expecting them to give in too much at the end of the day on this reconciliation deal. My best guess at this point is we're lucky if we get 2.5 trillion. That would be the best case. But at least he came on. So credit to him for that. But I don't want to go through so many. So I just picked one clip because to me, this is the part, what he said, that shows me that our intuition and what you saw and what I saw on the road for the last couple of years, they're not getting it. Colin, if you could play this clip when I was going at him about why don't you guys actually leave Washington and shame Manchin, Sinema, and the rest of them. I don't really get why the strategy wouldn't be, and granted, I'm not in DC, maybe I have an outsider's point of view. Why not say, this many people wanted 6 trillion. We've already gone down to 3.5 trillion. Now myself, Senator Sanders, the whole gang is going to West Virginia, is going to Arizona. Instead of trying to negotiate with corporatists, go on these people's front doors and put pressure on them. It seems to me Manchin, Sinema, they never actually have pressure on them because the media kind of slobbers over them as centrists. And the progressives, it doesn't really seem there's any rallying the base. I think that's one thing progressives, I don't agree with progressives who have called you all sellouts and all those things, but it doesn't really seem like you're rallying the troops because they would follow you if they see you fighting.
I had called and publicly led 23 House members to say that we ought to overrule the parliamentarian. I don't understand this parliamentarian business. No one knows who she is. I don't understand why we care about what she has to say on these issues. The vice president has the authority and the precedent to overturn that. I led a letter pushing for that. I got pushback saying, why are you taking on the administration so early on? We had a press conference with Reverend Barber and the late Richard Trumka on that. And we did actually push and fight for that to the extent we can in Congress. So that was not something where we just gave a pass. and said, oh, okay, who cares on the $15 wage? We organized, we pushed, we've continued to push on that. On foreign policy,
But is pushing, writing a letter? I mean, I've seen a lot of letters written to Biden, Pelosi. I get you have to be somewhat diplomatic in there, but like it doesn't. I see what happened with President Obama, where he created this massive organizing army as a candidate, and then he just didn't tap into it and started basically starting on the Republicans' 50-yard line in negotiations and giving them half the farm right out of the bat. Bernie has a massive army. I think there are tons of progressives who right now feel leaderless. I'm not saying you to go in there, figurative, guns a-blazing, but it just seems to me you're sending letters, making calls for. I mean, there's a lot of progressive organizations that didn't exist 5 years ago. Why aren't the tactics a little bit more aggressive and tapping into, an army of activists around the country to challenge the president on not putting the $15 minimum wage in there and several other things?
I'm open to those ideas. We did try to mobilize. We worked with Sarah, Jairam, Saru, Jairam, and One Fair Wage. We tried to work with labor. We tried to work with other organizations in the mobilization with tipped workers, because some tipped workers are only making a little over $2.13. So we did try to mobilize on that. I'm all for ideas on how we can mobilize to get $15 into a must-pass bill. And if there is a mobilization, I agree that that's something we ought to deliver. In terms of mobilization, I think the mobilization we need is to get more progressives into the House elected and into the Senate elected. I'm not sure mobilizing in Manchin's district, where Trump carried it by 30%, is actually what's going to move him on these policies.
Well, Manchin is, he's all of West Virginia, not a district. And I would remind you, Bernie won every county in West Virginia. So it seems to me by the polls, the people of West Virginia want the majority of what's in this. All right. So you get the hang of it. I got a lot to say. So you go, Jen.
Yeah, I think, I've, from the first time that you said that they should be in West Virginia on Manchin's doorstep, AOC, Bernie, the whole squad, Roe, everyone should be there. I was disappointed in Roe's answer for a lot of reasons, but also because he didn't really it seemed like he was getting, defensive and saying like, whoa, actually, here is what we have done, and not actually listening to why. And then he said, well, Manchin lives in a conservative area. And of course, as you brought up, but in the primaries for Democrats, like Bernie won. So I don't think that he was hearing you in what that would do for the progressive movement, for this bill. It would give people hope, because right now they see progressives not out there fighting, and they feel no hope. They feel like, we feel leaderless, rudderless, etc. We hear it all the time. But if people saw the progressive caucus out there, progressives in Senate out there, are so-called leaders in Congress out there, people would wake up and pay attention and feel some hope again. And so it's about, he was taking it like on face value and not understanding really where progressives are, where people in this country are, and how people are feeling, and how let down people feel. So I was disappointed in that. It really didn't seem like he got the point of it in a way that he should have.
Right. So, I didn't have 2 hours with him, but my point is Bernie Sanders 2016, right? Why did Bernie Sanders, who nobody expected to win anything, win 23 states? Because fighting is contagious. Fighting in a good way is contagious, right? So you start seeing rallies going from 5,000 to 10,000 to all of a sudden it's 25, 30,000. You see him fighting the establishment, calling out all these people by name, blah, 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 blah. And people gravitate to it. Young people, younger Black people, younger Latinos. That is gone. That is gone, because I really think Roe, the squad, feels like campaigning tactics are different than when you're governing. But the tactics you've been using while governing are not getting you anywhere. They're not getting you anywhere. They're getting, maybe you got a little more in the 1.9 trillion deal by being diplomatic to Biden, but it was completely inadequate to what we needed, right? By not fighting for the $15 minimum wage, by not fighting for the public option, which Biden has totally abandoned, that he ran on, by basically succumbing to it. Maybe it's prevented them from backbenching you and taking you off committees. Maybe it's going to give you a little bit higher number in terms of this reconciliation deal than you would have gotten. But the point is, what I was trying to point out to him, it's not only about exciting the progressive base, which right now is, splintering off in many different directions, some of them not good directions. It's also about Joe Manchin and, corporate Democrats are not pressured by progressives. So I was trying to make the point, how do you know it won't work if you guys are not doing it? So Bernie, for example, said, if I'm elected president, no, I'm not going to meet with Mitch McConnell and first compromise. I'm going to tell him to look out the window at the army I've assembled. So if Ro Khanna and Pramila Jayapal and Bernie Sanders and fill in the blank of the rest of them were in West Virginia and then Arizona holding large rallies calling out Joe Manchin, you think that's not going to move him? You think the media attention calling out Joe Manchin's not going to move him at all? You think somebody like Joe Manchin or Kirsten Sinema, I don't think they have any shame, but you think public pressure, because obviously the in-person events is going to extend like wildfire, social media things going viral, the media will have to cover it if you're on his doorstep. I made the point to him, it wasn't in that clip we showed, Jen. AOC's chief of staff and communications director, when they left, I don't know if they still have it, they created a super PAC. And the first thing they did was go on the air in West Virginia on radio when Manchin was refusing on the $2,000 checks back in January. And they started hammering him on that and shaming him that Joe Manchin is preventing you from $2,000 rescue checks or whatever. Manchin very quickly started walking that back. So the point is, if you're never going to actually get outside DC and activate the base, A, you're not going to have a base for much longer, but B, that gives you leverage. It helps your leverage. That's what I don't think he gets. And maybe it's because he's been in Washington, DC too long and the rest of them. But just, being cordial and, not upsetting Manchin and Sinema and not publicly shaming them, it's what it is going to lead to is a severely watered down bill and the same line about, well, this is what we could get under, we don't have the White House, we don't have Congress. To a certain extent, that's correct. I'm sorry to tell you, folks, it's not going to be 3.5 trillion. It's just not. But I don't understand and why I mentioned Obama, Jen. I can't stand Obama. At that point, that was the biggest technological organizing apparatus in campaign history. He created a ARM email list, text, all that, and he did nothing with it. So I fundamentally disagree with him, and I'm sure the squad feels this way too. What you're doing, the strategy you're doing has not worked. So to think if you have a rally with 10 to 20,000 people in West Virginia or Arizona or Jersey, where that slimeball Gottheimer is, the media will cover it. They will have to respond. Sinema, Manchin, they can't just ignore it. It would activate your base to start flooding the lines and calling them. Maybe activate in-person protests. Nothing bad can come from it, yet he kind of dismissed it.
Yeah, I go back and forth on what I think about Ro Khanna. I think he is someone who has a good heart. Like you say, has he been in the DC bubble too long? I mentioned this last week that when I was on the writing team for Justice Dems and Brand New Congress, this was 5 or 6 years ago, we held a Medicare for All kind of rally, and Justice Dems was brand new, hardly known at all. We had maybe fewer than 10 people show up, and Ro Khanna showed up. John Conyers also showed up, and that's it. This was in DC, so it wasn't difficult for people in Congress to attend. And that's it. That's all who came. So those things do mean something. He didn't have to come. It wasn't a big photo op there weren't CNN cameras there or anything like that. So I think he has a good heart, but you also have to look at things like the fact that he is very wealthy. He and his wife. His wife is invested in defense, which is disturbing because it's a lot of money there. And if if he's a progressive and anti-war and all of that, that's obviously a conflict. So I don't know if he's just conflicted in his head about certain things, if he's pulled in one direction. Again, if he's just been inside that DC bubble too long. And going back to your idea of showing up in Arizona, showing up in West Virginia, and showing people that you can take action, that would even CNN, MSNBC, they would have to talk about this. Oh, AOC and Bernie Sanders are, wherever Joe Manchin's office is. Wow, that's crazy. So that he is something he just doesn't get. And that's about having your finger on the pulse. And it also has to be said that Khanna is entrenched in like Silicon Valley folks. So he has to make those people happy. And we do often forget when we're talking about Congress that ultimately these people are answerable to their districts, and their districts might not represent progressives throughout America. So he has to think about progressives and in air quotes specifically in his Silicon Valley district.
So I'm not,
which is not an excuse, by the way.
So I should point this out. I would think it's kind of a breaking news in this back and forth. I guess the Democrats are having their caucus call right now, whatever that means. So at the end, shockingly, Pelosi says, quote, "We can't be ready to say until the Senate passes the bill, we can't do BIF," meaning the bipartisan infrastructure deal. So what she's talking about there is we can't hold off on the bipartisan infrastructure deal until the reconciliation deal is ready. So she is, and my interpretation is exactly what John Bresnahan from Punchbowl News, which is kind of like nerdy Politico people that left and started their own thing. Bottom line, bipartisan infrastructure vote moving ahead Thursday, even if no reconciliation deal. So the Democrats, Pelosi, this is what I told the squad. They are not your friends. They will screw you. They are not going to honor the deal. And I thought this was going to happen. They will go ahead with the bipartisan deal. And Roe said on CNN, I think, as long as we have an agreement on the reconciliation deal, then we will vote for the bipartisan. No. Until it's passed, I don't care what their agreement is. These are political terrorists you're dealing with, Ro Khanna, okay? And AOC and the squad. Their agreement, unless it's written in blood, I don't care what their agreement is. So at least from this, these people are pretty in the know. They were reading out exactly what was happening on the conference call. So on the caucus call, so obviously they have sources there, that Pelosi was basically saying at the end that we can't forever wait for the bipartisan infrastructure deal if the reconciliation deal isn't ready. So she's already moving away from the deal that was both at the same time. So this again is only adds to what we're talking about, Jen. Yeah. Try something different. I think they are deathly afraid. And Roe didn't say this, but I really think this is part of it. They are deathly afraid of progressives being blamed if it tanks, because then the media narrative, if it doesn't happen, because then the media narrative will be progressives cost Democrats the House and the Senate. And, it will harm the progressive movement and progressive campaigns because they will be villainized as the people who basically said, the progressives were the people who made sure nothing happened. Nothing was passed. And to that, I say, they will blame you no matter what. They will find a way to blame progressives. If it's raining, it's the progressives' fault.
Well, they're already doing that. They're already setting it up on CNN, MSNBC, that this is the fault of progressives if this doesn't go through, if this infrastructure bill doesn't go through. And how could they, be doing this?
Right. So that's the bottom line. And even if it does go through, which if it does go through at a high number, it's not Biden who should be credited, it's Bernie. Bernie is the one behind the scenes that got most of these provisions in and forced Biden and the corporate Democrats' hands. A lot of people didn't like that he hasn't been screaming against Biden. I haven't liked it. I've criticized him. But part of not screaming and kind of working in the inside is the reason it was even at 3.5 trillion in the first place. Tim Kaine and other corporatists said it would not be at that number without Bernie Sanders. But at a certain point, like, this is the same old record spinning. They are, Pelosi's statement is kind of a big deal because now she's subtly moving away from, to get to both of them together or nothing. They're saying, well, the reconciliation deal, we can't rush it. There's a lot of moving parts, so we can vote for the bipartisan deal. No, but I say to Ro Khanna and the rest of them, a lot of you started out as activists, maybe not Ro, but a lot of you started out as activists. And think about what you would have been telling Ro Khanna to do outside of Congress before you got in there. So it just defies logic to me. I'm not naive. Joe Manchin is an evil man. I mean, he's intentionally ignoring the destruction of the planet to enrich his donors. But human beings are human beings, and shaming could work. So it's one thing, you're not shaming him on CNN, but if you actually went with numbers, you say, hey, we're showing up to West Virginia on Saturday. Me, Bernie, you're going to have 10,000 people and media coverage. I mean, that's just an obvious thing that should be done that they don't want to do. And I don't really get it. Let the media push the framework of Dem disarray and all this shit. Voters aren't going to vote based on that. They actually like people who fight. Look at Trump. He won in 2016. He was full of it, but he was shown as a fighter. He was selling a bill of goods, but people gravitate to people who fight. So maybe the upper middle class suburbanites won't like that rally, but the working class voters will, that have been fleeing the Democratic Party for 30 years. So I don't know. It's frustrating to me. I don't think they're clueless, but I think their political instincts are pretty bad.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm nervous, I have to say, in case folks haven't heard or realized.
Oh, there goes the fire alarm. Go ahead.
Is that your house or mine?
Mine.
Okay. So yeah, I don't know. What was I saying? Yeah, I'm nervous. I think we all are. The vote was supposed to be today, and Nancy announced that it's pushed back to Thursday. So obviously we're not privy to the behind the scenes of all of that, but she said, I'll never bring anything to the floor that I don't have the votes for. And now she's saying this. So what does all of this mean combined? I think it's going to be a hell of a few days sitting on pins and needles. This is massive. It can't be said enough. What Bernie has said, that this is the most essential legislation since the 30s, since FDR, is true. This is huge. This is substantive, and that this reconciliation bill might not go through, or even I don't know if she'll drop it and not have it combined. I don't know what the plans are, but that's really horrifying to me when you think about how much this will change people's lives if it passes.
Right. So let's read some super chats before we go. 222 double K, $20. Sorry about this. Double K, $20. Double K, $10. Thank you for both super chats.
I'll read it and you maybe put you on mute. I
don't know. Do people care? Yeah, put me on mute.
Kind of horrible.
Yeah.
Okay, Double K, we said thank you so much. $20 in the super chat. Double K, another $10 in the super chat. Robert Copland, $10 in the super chat. Andy, $10 in the super chat, saying thank you, Jordan, for getting Roe from Congress to comment on Assange. This canned answer of not knowing enough on the case is unacceptable. Go ahead, Jordan. I give you permission. Now that your blinking is over.
Yeah, that's what I said. I mean, maybe you and I just disagree. I think he knows enough about, like, when you say there's a morality issue, clearly you know some things or you've read some things. So when I challenged him on the morality issue and he was like, well, I haven't brushed up on it. Give me a break. Clearly, you just don't want to say that you think he helped Russia because you know the shitstorm you'd get because it's not true. But in fairness to Khanna, our interview was Saturday. This bombshell story came out Sunday, and that bombshell story has in it that the CIA could not find any evidence that Assange was working with the Russians. So maybe I'll ask him, do you still think this? Andy P, $10. Oh, we just read that one. Thank you, NDP. Faint Signals from Vega, tip $2. Thank you. Robbie Burns, $10. Free Assange, free Leonard Peltier. Appreciate it. And yes, on Leonard Peltier. Double K, another $10. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Peace Walker, $5. Serious question. How the hell do we fight against organizations like the CIA? Jordan, Jen, love your work. We'll have to ask JFK. And many others. Honestly, I wish I had an answer. This deep state military industrial complex it's beyond layers of an onion. I mean, it's a whole goddamn orchard. I don't know if onions are in an orchard, but
they are not.
Until money is removed from politics to any degree, you're not going to have much effect on these organizations are designed to basically be criminal syndicates. And let's remember when people talk about the ungodly $770 billion defense budget, that's not taking into account the CIA or the FBI. And I mean, you look at the reports, it's kind of unknown how much money is spent on the CIA. So yeah, I wish I had an answer. I don't know how to take them on other than just keep exposing their treacherous activity.
We're going to take a members trip to the onion orchard next.
MHC 999, Jordan and Jen, how do you think we should balance sticking to facts and not engaging in sectionalism as Kevin described it?
Good question.
Sectionalism meaning tribalism?
Like partisanship or tribalism, yeah.
I mean, we're partisan, we're progressives, we don't hide it, but our reporting is based on facts, which informs our passion. I think Kevin was kind of talking about, I think Kevin's point, how I took it, was like staying out of the online food fight so that when you actually do report things, people will read it because you haven't pissed them off.
Yeah.
I agree somewhat, disagree on some things. I mean, Jen and I think Jen and I privately talked about this. I think we spent too much time reacting to the online food fight and like responding to people in the chat and whatever. And there were some things that we felt like just based on our integrity and caring about the progressive movement, we had to respond to, and particularly when we thought people were going in a direction that was unproductive and kind of self-sabotaging. But at a certain point, like, people are going to believe what they believe. They're going to gravitate to voices that validate how they're feeling or what they're thinking. And unfortunately, online, there isn't much area anymore where people want to watch content that doesn't always basically validate their views. So I think on some things, we're not going to bite our tongue. We're going to speak up, even if it loses us subscribers or whatever. But by and large, I think Status Coup has something that nobody else does, and that's the in the field unique reporting. And I think that's where we shine, and that's what we should focus on. If you agree, Jen.
I do. Yeah. And we've talked a lot about this, and our thought is that we need to not get dragged into nonsense. I will say, on the question of like partisanship, we have Republicans who watch us and are thankful for our factual reporting, and also the fact that we're very upfront about our personal politics. I think people appreciate that. We're not CNN like pretending to be impartial when actually, like, clearly they're all partial. So I take journalism very seriously. it means something to the world. It in my opinion, it truly is, the fourth estate. And it drives me insane when people, so I'm not saying this as like a gatekeeping kind of thing, but it drives me crazy when people purposefully misuse journalism to trick their audience or to purposefully mislead, which happens from independent media to mainstream media, etc. And especially in these days, in this environment, with COVID, etc., I do feel a responsibility to call out like directly harmful misinformation that will kill people. If someone's sharing, a so-called journalist is sharing just outright lies about COVID, that's not okay. That's not acceptable. That's a direct danger. So I think there's a balance between focusing too much on it, which we were definitely doing because we do care, we do have integrity, and we believe in people, we care about people, and to see people led astray is just really distressing. But there's a time and a place, and there's a line, and unfortunately, like, we can't save everyone. We can't correct all the misinformation and all the propaganda and all the lies. And so for me to accept that, that's something that I am working on for sure.
And I also think, just from a wanting to watch something point of view, for the people that are watching us and like are enjoying it, it kind of becomes a little annoying to once we steer off course to spend 10-15 minutes responding to commenters. You're like, wait, I'm not watching for this. I'm watching for the reporting, and so I get it. But good question. Thank you.
Log 66, 10 pounds. You are, of course, both beautiful. Thank you. Great interview with Kevin. Nobody knows more about the Assange issue. Thanks for carrying this. Kevin is extraordinary. He's, Jordan mentioned at the top of the show, like waking up early, extraordinarily early, depending on, I think sometimes he's been like physically in London. Other times he's been, admitted to watch it online. And the time difference, of course, is killer. So he's on this consistently. Major kudos to Kevin.
And just so you know, I did reach out to Julian Assange's brother, who
Gabriel.
probably didn't get it because he's in Australia, as well as Stella Morris. So we, if they're available, we'll definitely try to interview them too. Peace Walker, $5. Exactly, Jordan. We need to show these politicians that we have the hold. We have the hold, the power. Why is Roe and other progressive politicians so damn spineless? I think it's a simplistic narrative that they're spineless. I mean, that's how it comes off, obviously. But I also think what I said, they have bad political instincts. So that doesn't mean they're not being spineless, but they have bad instincts. And I think part of it is a lot of them, I mean, Roe has been there longer than the squad, I think, but a lot of them have just been kind of hoodwinked once they got in there to this, like, congressional norms and diplomacy, and got to focus on the long game, when before they got in there, that's certainly not how they thought of things. And they thought people like Khanna, if AOC was looking from the outside, she would have been dismayed by a lot of Khanna's answers, right? So the devil's advocate position can be, well, Jordan, once they get in there, you don't know everything. It's different when you're in there. Sure, it's not all black or white, but at the end of the day, I think they're not showing spine because they don't have good political instincts. And some people might say because they're cowards or whatever. But I think when he's telling me, I don't think it would make a difference to hold a massive rally on Joe Manchin or Kirsten Sinema's doorstep, to me, that's a gaping issue of judgment in terms of what works politically. So,
yeah, and that's what I was saying. Like, that to me, that he thinks that wouldn't make a difference. Yeah, he doesn't understand how people feel and how much that could invigorate the base of progressives in this country.
But also, yes, but also it could help your negotiating position. Like, if you have massive rallies, the media is covering it, things are starting to go viral. Joe Manchin might be a crook. People don't like being tarred and feathered, in large numbers, right? but they haven't tarred and feathered them talking about the squad. Even Bernie has been resistant on really just calling it like it is with Manchin, Sinema, Biden, obviously. So yeah, spineless, yes, but also, they are lacking political instincts. Observer, $5. You need a party or a wing of one closely tied to labor and other social movements. Such a great point.
Absolutely.
Such a great point, Observer, because I've been dismayed. I know you have been, Jen. There's all these strikes going on. Worker strikes, Nabisco, Frito-Lay, the coal miners down south, nurses in Massachusetts. I mean, there's several others that I'm probably forgetting at the moment. Plus the union drives, Starbucks, Amazon. That's an explosion in the labor movement that's been dormant for 20 years in this 30 years in this country. And it's not really a top issue in progressive media. I mean, you'd be lucky if you saw occasional videos on it. So there's a disconnect.
That's part of it too, is, we haven't seen, as you say, for decades, this, these strikes and the like. What we also hadn't seen much before, Black Lives Matter, were protests. Like, protest movements had really died down for a while after, the so-called hippie era. And so progressives are, people in politics in general are kind of letting those things fizzle out. This is real action from real people, and it needs to be, seize that momentum, and they're not doing that. So, I completely agree. We need a party that cares deeply about labor, other social movements. It's going to take, some great organization and some leadership to truly get such a party going.
Absolutely. Wow. Crafty Geek, $100.
Amazing. Thank you. That is so helpful. Incredible.
Thank you so much, Crafty. We really, frankly, just keeping it real, could use an influx of money. So thank you, Crafty Geek, for that amazing super chat. Dave L, $5. The interview with Khanna was amazing. I wouldn't have been able to keep the tone that even-handed. Thank you. And I think, to make a point, this isn't this is not a compliment to myself, but I think people have gotten the wrong impression that unless you hammer them with a 2x4, you're not tough or you're a sellout or whatever. But you're trying to challenge them and get answers and actually make it productive and informative. So I don't see the need to just go scorched earth and rant against him. There is a way to challenge him and frankly kind of call out bullshit in a just a professional way. So that's what I tried to do.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I told Jordan this privately. I think it's just absolutely a great interview, hard hitting. I said no one can truly have good criticisms of it, in my opinion. You could keep going. I'll write you a list of how amazing it was and all the reasons. Peace Walker, $5. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. I'd rather have Roe and the others be damned for doing something, go down fighting for something. Absolutely. If you're going to be blamed anyway, you may as well go down, metaphorically, guns a-blazing. So yeah, totally. MHC $9.99 in the super chat. Jordan has incredible focus and not getting distracted by the smoke alarm, and my experiences are really loud and hard to ignore.
I'm downstairs, so it's loud down here, but upstairs it's really it'll hurt your ears.
Wait, so yours aren't connected? Why didn't it go off in your basement? I'm concerned you're gonna burn and die in a fire now. You should get.
Well, no, I hear it from upstairs.
No, but it should also go off physically in your basement, or else what happens?
Home ownership.
My God, Jordan, make sure it's connected in the basement.
What are you gonna do? But yeah, I mean, maybe we'll go through more of the Roe interview. Not now, but overall, I was complimenting them last week for holding the line. To be fair, they haven't folded yet, but when he kept saying to me, well, what's your number? And I personally, I told him I wouldn't go below 3 trillion because to me, it's not just about the importance of what's in this deal. It's about breaking the cycle of continually accepting watered down U.S. Chamber of Commerce blessed neoliberal legislation. And at a certain point, they're going to keep watering it down and keep playing you for fools if they know at the end of the day you will agree, right? So at a certain point, like that person said, go down fighting for something and let the media tar and feather you. But you say, we have a climate catastrophe, and they stripped it down to the point where it would do nothing. We cannot in good conscience support that. We have majorities in the House, the Senate, the presidency, and Democrats ran on doing big, bold change. And these people wanted to water it down. We cannot in good conscience go along with that. And for the people that say, is it better than nothing? Well, I think the American people deserve better than constantly, it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. Anything else before we go, Jen?
No, just, mark it on your calendar to watch us all week. You can definitely not rely on YouTube or wherever you're watching to notify you. Same with our tweets, same with everything. So definitely, mark it on your calendar every day. Check out Status Coup.
Or just join statuscoup.com/text. Statuscoup.com/text. So you'll get a text message when we're live. It costs us a shit ton of money, by the way, to have this text system. But there's no way around it. I mean, nobody's getting notified from YouTube. So text messages really are the only way that people even know when we're live. Before we go, I just want to point out something sad. Colin, if you have it. So while I was at Standing Rock, I met a really amazing man, indigenous water protector. Name was Myron Dewey. Hold on one second. Yeah. I mean, whatever. We could change it after Colin. There's an E. Dewey. So my bad if I sent it to you the wrong way. But Dewey. But Myron actually was a drone operator at Standing Rock. And it was very important, these drone operators, because it was basically indigenous people's version of surveilling the oil company and surveilling the police and seeing what they were up to, how close they were to finishing. How close were they to the Missouri River? Where were the police lining up? It was basically, it wasn't just cool, we have a drone, let's go fly it, but really surveillance on behalf of the water protectors there. Standing Rock, I mean, this was a long time water protector, indigenous activist, long before Standing Rock. And unfortunately, he passed away. I don't know the full details, but it was a car accident. I wish I didn't get how old he was, but I don't think he was not an older gentleman. He must have been 40s, maybe 50s.
This article, Native News Online, which you can check out. He was 49 years old. Colin, I'm going to pop this over to you so we can just read a few more details. So Myron Dewey, a filmmaker, professor, just pop it up whenever, Colin, professor and journalist, passed away in a fatal car accident early Sunday morning in Yamba, Nevada. Sources confirmed to Native News Online. He was 49. Dewey founded Digital Smoke Signals, a media production company that shared live frontline footage during the 2016 protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline near the Standing Rock Indian Reservation in North Dakota. His drone footage of the DAPL protests garnered recognition for the cause and elevated his status as a journalist covering environmental and indigenous issues. Dewey was one of several Native American journalists arrested while covering the Standing Rock resistance and faced a Class A misdemeanor charge related to his use of the drone. He faced up to a year imprisonment and a $2,000 fine. The charge was eventually dropped. The world lost a dedicated water protector and digital warrior with the death of Myron Dewey. Environmental Indigenous Network organizer Dallas Goldtooth told Native News Online. His efforts to defend the sacred and protect the water from ecological destruction will always be cherished and remembered. Our movement was stronger with him, and now we move forward mourning our loss. Dewey received numerous awards for his journalism, and also he co-directed the award-winning 2017 film Awake, a Dream from Standing Rock. So you guys could read the rest of this kind of tribute to Myron Dewey.
And I didn't really get a lot of time in Standing Rock to like fuck around with people because I was always working. But I did have some one-on-one conversations with Myron at the hotel casino, and I just vaguely remember him saying something to me like, "Always remember to see the world through Indigenous eyes," and that really stood out to me. Saying, "Always remember to see the world through Indigenous eyes." Of course, I can't because I'm not Indigenous, and I can't even imagine just the atrocities done to them. But it was a powerful thing he said, and I think a lot of times, when there's obviously the stuff about Israel, Palestine, and apartheid and things like that, like we forget we are occupying where we are. We are occupiers. I mean, that's America, and we occupy native lands. We have basically pushed Native Americans into rampant poverty, alcoholism, drug addiction, the fact that we have this epidemic of missing Native American girls, which we covered on Rockfin last week, and so many different things. It's all connected to the original sin of this country. Obviously, we have slavery, but we also had what we did and continue to do to Native Americans. And I think, Standing Rock, unless you were there, it's not really something you could describe. It really affected me. I was, a white, upper middle class, I guess you could say, kid from Long Island. I never met a Native American person on Long Island. And, it really made me see the world in a different way. So people like Myron, there's a lot of Myron Deweys out there that have continued in their activism after Standing Rock, whether it was continuing to fight Keystone, Line 3, fighting, mines that are developing. They're building mines next to on native reservations, other fracking projects, Bears Ears, where the Trump administration basically took 85% of a historic public land in Utah. That was, and people like Myron, I think he was in Nevada when he died doing activism, and his film, he co-produced or whatever, the film with Josh Fox. I forget the name, but it was depicted the Standing Rock movement. So really sad. Best wishes to his family, obviously. But that's it. So I'm not positive on my status for tomorrow. I was going to take today off, but every day I try to take off, it doesn't seem to work out. I'm a little burnt out, so I was hoping to get a day or two off at some point. But obviously, with the bipartisan deal versus the 3.5 trillion, we'll be live when there's key news. But thank you for supporting. Consider becoming a member, and we will see you either tomorrow or Wednesday.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.